What a week this has been if you're an Indian cricket follower. Not a great week to remember. We don't know how it will end in terms of the test match between India and New Zealand. But it started off with the women's team getting knocked out of the Women's World Cup. And midweek there was another shocker when the men's team playing at home, seemingly with a halo around them, got bowled out for 46. Lots to discuss, lots to moan about, lots to crib. Vinayakk Mohanarangan is with us as always. Vinayakk, where do we begin? You pick.
Where do we end right now?
I mean, whether you want to start far away from home in Dubai or somewhere around closer home to you in Bangalore.
Well, I am in Delhi, so good that I'm not in Chennai because I might have had the temptation to go and watch it. So that wouldn't have been great. Yeah, so we'll start with the Women's World Cup, I guess. Plenty of expectations, plenty of hope. Harmanpreet Kaur called this the best Indian team that has gone to a World Cup ever, she felt. And that best team ended up not reaching the semi-finals. 2018, they were semi-finalists. 2020, they were finalists. The last edition, they were semi-finalists. And inches away from being finalists. And after 3 consecutive, maybe not great, but good World Cup campaigns, they finished in the group stage. You know, that at a time when you're thinking that Indian women's cricket needs to take a step forward, I would have to say that's a step back, if not more. So, yeah, a definite blow to the team. And you can say that, you know, these World Cups, I mean, especially T20 format is not predictable and you don't know how things go. But honestly, there were very few positives to take from this campaign for India.
See, so I'd be honest, I don't follow women's cricket that closely. I'll have questions which may sound very basic, but I think those questions will also be on the minds of many followers. I'll start off with a basic thing. When we say, you know, that India didn't qualify for the semi-finals and it's an upset in that regard. First of all, like you mentioned the past records, and those past records have been quite decent. है ना? मतलब आप final में पहुंच चुके हो, you've been to the semi-finals. So from where I see this whole thing, you're allowed a rare bad tournament, you know, since you've been like on a decent run for all these years. I guess one bad tournament is okay. Perhaps, you know, not the right timing in terms of this is a period when people are taking note of women's cricket. But are we also being a little too harsh in terms of the criticism?
No, Mihir, I think I'd disagree there. I mean, I've been following the women's team closely since 2016, I would say. And there have been campaigns in the past where what you said would be right. At least maybe the last couple of years, you could make, you know, arguments for the sake that, you know, yeah, they did well. I mean, there are mitigating circumstances around them. You know, maybe the preparations have not been great. Like the last World Cup, for instance, in South Africa, they reached the semi-finals despite having an interim coach. I mean, can you imagine the men's team going to a World Cup with an interim coach, like the batting coach getting promoted as the head coach, Rishikesh Kanitkar? Nothing. Last World Cup was Rishikesh Kanitkar. So, I mean, nothing against Kanitkar, but that showed where Indian cricket's mindset was when it came to the women's game. It always had this sort of secondary treatment to it. Yeah. But in the last 2 years, I mean, I wouldn't say things are great, but you've had the WPL. You have 2 seasons of WPL where you've had the chance to try and, you know, upskill the T20 mindset in the country. You've had a relatively stable head coach in Amol Muzumdar for the past 10, 11 months. You've had what Harmanpreet calls, I mean, she's been around for a while and she calls it the best squad that we've taken to the World Cup. So you've had all that. And despite that, you've not managed to reach the semi-finals of a 10-team tournament. We also have to be clear that, you know, India are at the forefront of the women's game for the last 2-3 years. Some good moves have been made. And in a smaller tournament, you're expected to take the game, you know, dominate the game. You know, people like when I remember still, you know, Alyssa Healy and Sophie Devine, 2 of the greatest women's cricketers of all time, said maybe the 2022 ODI World Cup. I might be wrong there, but in one of those pre-tournament discussions, both of them made the same point that when the WPL starts, the Indian women's cricket is going to be unstoppable, right? Because that's the sort of talent that they've always had. It just needs the nudge in the right direction. And here we are 2 years down the line and we've not qualified for the semi-finals in a smaller tournament, right? I mean, that's kind of, you need to take stock. There has to be some sort of accountability there, I think.
I'm all for accountability. I'm totally with you on the accountability part. And there are a few points that, of course, we'll be discussing as the pod goes along. Especially, you mentioned Amol Mazumdar and 1 or 2 things he said caught my eye. But, you know, at the same time, in the cycle of all teams, the fortunes, the way sport is, right?
Yeah.
There will be this whole cyclical thing. And we've seen with the best teams, be it any sport, I mean, why take any sport? Just look at the men's cricket. And they were knocked out in the opening round of the 2007 World Cup. And it felt like end of the world back then. And 4 years later, they won the World Cup on home soil. And we see countless such examples through sport. So, and there's this other point you mentioned about WPL. Again, it's something maybe we'll discuss in depth later on. But is WPL the answer to all that ails Indian women's cricket? I don't know. I'm not an expert on that. So perhaps you may be able to shed light. But say, for example, if we know in India what the men's cricket structure is like, the pathway, right? Right from junior days to the national team. Are those gaps filled in women's cricket? Or is it just a case where you've made it top heavy, you've tried to take a top-down approach, and then you realize in tournaments like these that the bottom of the pyramid is still very weak?
Oh, absolutely. You're 100% right there. That is the part of the BCCI discussion that will come into later. And yeah, I mean, it's obviously not all down to the team and the management and the players that went to the World Cup. There are other factors that have constantly been an issue with the women's cricket in India. But like I said, there is a bare minimum that you have to do. And for me, even in a format as fickle as T20, you cannot be where you are in the world game right now and not qualify for semi-finals. I mean, if they'd lost in the first semi-finals, fine. I mean, knockout matches on your day, you're going to lose. The fact that India lost in the group stage because of pretty much mistakes that they made, right? I mean, there are no mitigating circumstances for that, for me. That is a definite step backward, especially because the moment the schedule came out, you knew that you were in a group of death, which is okay, right? I mean, if you're in a group of death, it's supposed to be tough to get out. That's why you call it the group of death. You knew that you're in a group of death. You knew you're starting your tournament with a match against New Zealand, which is with Australia also in the group. It's a virtual quarterfinal, right? Your first match is potentially a virtual knockout. So did you prepare for that match like it was a virtual quarterfinal? And India simply didn't. They were just not ready for the conditions that were in UAE. And when talking about conditions, you're talking about Asian conditions, the conditions where you're expected to be better, where you're expected to show that, you're more familiar, you know how to handle things. But you ended up losing by nearly 60 runs to a New Zealand side who had lost 10 straight matches in T20s coming into the World Cup. But what New Zealand had done right was they played Australia in the lead up to the World Cup, knowing full well that they might as well lose all 3 matches. But they went and played Australia because they wanted to be sharp. And India didn't play a single match for 2 months before the World Cup. 2 whole months without a single competitive match since the Asia Cup final is not how you go into a World Cup. I don't care how much they say, we had great camps in Bangalore, we had a fitness camp, we had a fielding camp, we had a skills camp. No camp is ever going to make up for competitive match action.
Absolutely.
And India simply didn't prepare well, knowing full well that the first match is a virtual knockout. 2 warm-up matches before the tournament are not going to get you ready for the World Cup, right? And I mean, that is not even foresight, because even when that was happening, when people were wondering when is India play next, when is India going to play next, that was a topic of debate even before the tournament started. So for all those who questioned India's preparation, they were proved right. I mean, you could see this coming from a mile. Just simply very rusty in the opening game, and they just got thrashed by New Zealand. And you might beat Pakistan and Sri Lanka by decent margins, but that's not going to be enough to progress in semi-finals. So you could see this from a mile long, and I think that's what frustrates a lot of the Indian women's cricket fans.
Yeah, and we're recording this literally minutes after New Zealand have beaten West Indies to reach the final, where they'll be playing South Africa on Sunday. And it kind of also shows, Vinayakk, like you said, what planning can do. New Zealand went to Australia not expecting or not hoping to win there, but just to get some matches under their belt, which would come in handy during the main tournament. I mean, it's a bit like, the hockey team going to Australia in April before the Olympics, knowing fully well they might get thrashed over there, but it could help them in terms of intel they gather at the Olympics itself. So the milestones and the targets that you set along the way are certainly helpful. And, I'm with you on the performances, the camps. I was reading up the post-mortem reports that you've done and some of the quotes that Amol Mazumdar has given. When you look at it in hindsight, I mean, they're just kind of strange, because he's going on about the camp, and one that was, he's saying that was dedicated towards fielding and fitness. Fielding, you've said that it's not been that bad. And I guess it goes to show how India would have been, how poor India would have been in other parts of the game. And they had 8 weeks, is what Amol Mazumdar says. So, it just raises so many questions. Generally, when in the previous campaigns India have gone, has the approach been similar or did they do it different this time?
No, yeah, I mean, you have some sort of match time before the World Cup starts. And like I said, 2023, the preparation wasn't ideal either with the change in head coach, with the coaching situation quite late. And there were a lot of selection controversies in 2023 as well. People were wondering it was the right squad or not. And this time, you couldn't really argue that they have picked perhaps the best 15 that they could have picked from the pool that has been playing over the last 6 months. So there was not much in terms of selection controversy. There was a little bit of stability in the coaching staff as well, with Munish and Avishkar in the fielding and bowling roles. And they've been saying the right things in terms of, getting our fitness and fielding right. That's a priority. It's something that Amol said in his first press conference. And I agree, India have not been the fittest side or the greatest fielding side. But somehow that, even Harmanpreet after matches, half the time she says our fielding wasn't great, right? Every time you can't just point to fielding. I mean, your skills matter. New Zealand dropped today 5 catches in the match that they won against West Indies. Fine. You hold on to your catches, you're going to win more matches. That's sure. But I always get the feeling that India somehow uses this as a scapegoat, right? Arey, our fielding wasn't great. Arey, our catching wasn't great. Arey, our fitness wasn't great. What are you doing to upskill in terms of your batting and bowling? Your batting plans were not clear. Suddenly, 2 days before or a day before India leave for Dubai, Amol Mazumdar says in the press conference that, our number 3 has been an issue, but you wait and watch. We have a new option. And we were wondering what is going to happen. And then in the pre-tournament warm-ups, Harmanpreet Kaur walks out to number 3. Like, where did this come from? Like, no one saw that coming. Suddenly, just days before the World Cup, you have your, captain who's your number 4. She's played out of her 150 plus innings. She's batted at number 4 107 times before the tournament. I mean, that's where she's always played. And then suddenly you make her number 3. And then one game into the tournament, they drop that as well. Jemima walks out to number 3 in the next match. Then Harmanpreet walks out to number 3 in the following match. And then Jemima back at number 3. We've seen this in the past where come a World Cup tournament, we start to do things that is all out of whack for some reason. I remember the 2022 World Cup in New Zealand, the ODI World Cup. India didn't pick Jemima Rodrigues where, she would have been an asset in the middle order. Then suddenly out of nowhere, they have 3 left-handers in the top 3, which they've never done before. Smriti, Astika and Deepti are your number 3 all of a sudden. Or your top 3. Where is this coming from? Suddenly in stark contrast, now that you mentioned, South Africa are in the final, they stuck with Anneke Bosch at number 3 throughout the tournament. Anneke Bosch had a very ordinary start to the tournament. Her strike rate in the 3 matches that she batted was around 85. And then she comes to the semi-final where she's again at number 3. Plays the knock of her life, one of the all-time great performances in this World Cup to knock Australia out. That is what clear planning looks like. Clear planning and backing your plans, backing your players, plan in advance. Sophie Devine keeps saying this. People kept saying that we lost 10 matches straight before the World Cup, but we always had the belief in our plans. So she moved into the middle order. Georgia Plummer came to the top of the order to bat with Susie Bates. New combination. Divine always been majority been an opener in her career, long career. She comes to number 4, but they stuck with that plan in the lead up, in the preparations for the World Cup. And Plummer is one of the best batters in this tournament. A youngster who was promoted up the order and given time to settle in there, ended up being one of the main reasons for New Zealand going into the final. Right? You see things like this where planning and, preparation matters so much, and you compare that with India, and I don't think they got that right. But that's, I think, where we'll stop with the performances and personnel. But like you said, there are other problems to be fixed as well down the ladder.
Yeah, of course. But I mean, you mentioned 6 different players at number 3, and we've written that no other team but Pakistan have played more players in that position since December 2023. So that's another telling figure. The bowling, clearly it was meant for slow conditions and India went with 3 pacers. So that's another baffling team selection over there. I don't know if, I'm just going on a tangent over here, but this is a question I often think about. And it's not related to, the Women's T20 World Cup or the women's team performance as such. But you mention players at number 3 and who comes at the top and in the opening, or, we talk about who comes at 5, 6 or whatever. I somehow feel that cricket in that sense has not evolved for the simple reason that you look at, other sports. I mean, we both follow hockey closely, or football we follow closely, where players over a period of time are now it's a non-negotiable thing for them to be comfortable playing at multiple positions. And I guess in cricket, I'm not saying कि आप bowler को batsman जैसा खिला दो या batsman को wicket keeper बना दो, but if you're a recognized batter, at least you should be comfortable playing in different positions. And I somehow, with cricket, have not been able to buy that whole logic that X batter will perform great at number 5 but fail at number 3. You know, if you're a batter and your technique is there, and that's the reason perhaps you've made it to the national team, you should be good enough to do it.
Right, that actually is a very good point. Right, I mean, T20 is perhaps more about flexibility than the other formats. It lends itself to more flexibility than other formats. I would say it still comes down to role clarity, right? Flexibility in itself is also a trait. And if flexibility is what you're going for, then there has to be clarity in that flexibility as well, right? With India, you always get, at least I'm not going to go into the men's cricket, where, we are seeing a lot of experimentation now with Gambhir and Surya Kumar in the T20 format, at least. Even in the World Cup that India won, they did, make moves that, Akshar Patel coming up, for example, based on situations. We saw that happening. It's perhaps more prevalent in the men's game, at least for India. For the women's game, I wouldn't mind flexibility. I don't mind experimenting with the batting order, for example. It's just the role clarity. With Harman, I point out, okay, number 3, number 4 might be vague, but what we had immediately when we knew that Harmanpreet was batting at number 3, we had pointed out that she's not the fastest of starters, right? She takes her time to get settled in. She plays a lot of dot balls in her first 10, 20 deliveries. It's been the case. We've seen Harmanpreet bat for a long time, and we know that it's part of her game. She then accelerates like very few in the game can in the back end. So she needs her time to settle in and then goes big. So when you're number 3, who is quite likely to bat in the power play, because, Shafali Verma typically hasn't, and even Smriti in this World Cup was disappointing. They haven't typically been able to get out of the power play without losing a wicket. So when your number 3 comes into the power play and plays out dot balls, that's the kind of thinking that I'm not clear it makes sense, because you want the power play to be maximized. Right? You want the most number of boundaries. You want to minimize dot balls in the first 6 overs. But India didn't do that. That match against Pakistan perplexed me so much. If you decided that Harman is not going to bat at number 3, why promote Jenny? Why not try a pinch hitter, right? You could try and push someone in up the order. That game would have been ideal for a surprise number 3. Like you said, surprise, like be flexible, throw in a curveball to the opponent. When you knew that you need to improve your net run rate, why didn't you do that, right? You didn't give yourself the best chance to win. Net run rate didn't matter in the end for India because they lost 2 matches. But it could have, if India had managed to get ahead of Australia in that final match, it would have made New Zealand's life that much harder if India had chased the target against Pakistan by even 2-3 overs fewer, right? Even 12 balls. Like if Sajana Sajeevan had come in at number 3 and smashed 2 fours, that might have made New Zealand's life harder against Pakistan. For all we know, it didn't happen that way, but you didn't give yourself the best chance to win and progress to the semi-finals. Like there were mistakes all the way, right? So that is what kind of frustrates me beyond all the structural issues that we can touch upon.
Structural issues run deep. So, I don't know if it will be, if we'll have enough time to cover in one episode. But one of the immediate fallouts that Devendra Pandey has reported is Harmanpreet's captaincy is now under scanner. Ironic, because when she took over in 2016, it was because India could not make the semi-final of the World Cup, which was at home. I don't know, man. Again, it's just a question of whether the team management is just trying to do something because they have to show that they've done something in terms of taking action, or if she really is the reason why India could not progress into the semi-finals. Her place, of course, is non-negotiable even now. I don't think there's anyone else ready to take her spot in the team. It's another thing, Vinayakk, we were joking about just keeping the recorder on in our office meetings, and especially the one that took place today morning, else we would have had some really great points raised by plenty of people. One of them being, I think you mentioned, or someone mentioned, I don't remember who it was, about how in other teams we constantly see new faces coming every cycle, which isn't something that's happening in India. And that's when I kind of started thinking about the pathways for a young player, whether, we mentioned the WPL, but that's 4 weeks in a year, and that's not going to get you players. That's not going to win you a World Cup. It's almost like saying ISL will get Indian football team into the World Cup, the Football World Cup. So that's certainly not going to happen like that. And then you read stuff about Harmanpreet, and I don't know how Amol Muzumdar has been as coach, but the fact that even he'll be deciding her future sounds a little bizarre to me.
No, yeah, that's kind of like you said, right? It's a quick fix to show, hey, like we are taking steps. I'm not sure if it's Whether Harmanpreet deserves to lead the team in the long time or not is a completely different debate. But you can't deny the fact that she still ended up being India's best batter in the tournament, right? So for all her falls or all her coming up short in these ICC events as India captain, she still manages to regularly step up under the big occasion, which I don't think the rest of the squad has quite managed to. I'd honestly say Smriti Mandhana was probably having the year of her career, with WPL title as RCB captain, then a sensational home series against South Africa. For her to stumble so badly at the World Cup was a little bit of a disappointment. As a vice captain, she had to step up. Shafali Verma has shown glimpses of her talent, but, winning the Under-19 World Cup is one thing, but has she translated that into the consistency that is required at the top of the order? That's another question. So I think there is a need for some sort of a cultural shift. I don't know how that is going to happen, honestly. I still feel that we are not playing modern T20 cricket and even modern ODI cricket for that matter.
Yeah.
There is a little bit of old-fashionedness to it.
Yeah.
And especially, this is nothing against Amol Mazumdar because I haven't had a chance to interact with him one-on-one, or I don't know how he works personally. But do we do the right processes when we pick the Indian head coach? This is something that I've wondered for the past 4 or 5 years.
No, my only counter argument here is, even if you get the best head coach in the world, do you have the players with the skill set to execute that? Do you have players who can hit big sixes, say for example in T20, or run around, save those boundaries, or take some beautiful catches that become match turning moments? What you were saying, India have 4 sixes in the entire tournament? Is that enough to win a T20 World Cup? So I don't think Amol Mazumdar will have a magic wand. Of course, he is responsible for certain things. He's responsible certainly to I guess say that I hope and pray that Pakistan is going to win or something to that effect. So those things, of course, are a part. But again, we come down to bigger issues.
Right. Yeah, that's the skill change. Yeah, that's the cultural change I think that needs to happen with white ball.
Yeah.
A lot of younger cricketers would perhaps be attuned to that, and maybe say a 16-year-old or 17-year-old right now watching what is going on has that thing saying, I need to change this. I need to be more fearless. I need to take the game. I need to attack every chance I get. And that comes through the system in maybe 3-4 years. Maybe that's where we'll start seeing the change. I still feel that, the WPL is a finishing school, right? Exactly like you said, it's the WPL. I mean, even, I don't know if there's a right comparison, but like Shivani Nayak was saying in the meeting, IPL didn't give India a T20 World Cup trophy till this year, essentially, right? I mean, it's taken IPL this long. So IPL or a WPL or a league is not like a one-stop fix, but it's a finishing school, right? And for that finishing school to help bridge the gap between domestic and international cricket is where it comes in. And the one disappointing aspect for me over the last 2 years of WPL is that we've only seen the regular faces, like the people who, regularly play for India, deliver at some level. The newer faces have, there has been a Sajana, there has been a Asha, a couple of decent success stories, but we need more of those to happen. And that has always been my issue with WPL being restricted to 5 teams in the first place, right? I mean, that basically narrows down your talent pool anyway. The argument that the talent pool is not wide enough in the women's game to have only 5 teams, I never agreed with that in the first place. They should have taken a bigger punt. You saw the moment you went out for bids, people came in. I mean, you had other franchises, even a KKR, RR wanted to own teams. But because you had only 5, you picked the top 5 and you're kind of stuck with that for the foreseeable future. And what does that is your top level talent will be spread across the 5 teams, and it's all the overseas players who do the bulk of the, right? You're still not going to see like an under 21 or an under 19 player come through. There have been a couple who have shown glimpses, but not consistently enough. And you said, like you said, it's a 4-week tournament, right? It's not as long as the IPL. Even one more team could have made a difference. That has been a big problem for me. And like you said, there has to be more done in domestically for the under 19, under 21 players. The India A tour is a start. They finally have an India A setup that hopefully comprises of longer tours, better, more frequent matches. That kind of was big for the senior Indian men to unearth a lot of talent. We know what Rahul Dravid did with that India A side in his role with the NCA. We saw that played a big role in where the Indian men are right now. So that is a very good start. There are the things that need to improve for sure.
Right. I mean, I guess there's a lot to talk about women's cricket and the direction in which it's heading. I don't know, Shashank, our producer, if you have anything to add there. But until Shashank comes in, we are running out of time. But Vinayakk, do you want to laugh about the men's team and the 46 all out?
No, I'd rather not, because the last time they got all out for something like that, we know what happened after. They ended up winning the Border Gavaskar story in Australia.
Yeah.
But I mean, that series will go down as one of the greatest in Indian history. So, that if anything, this Indian test team knows how to make a comeback, right? And if they could win a test in 2 days in Kanpur, then you don't write them off. But I honestly didn't see that coming. 46 all out in whatever be the conditions, Rohit coming out and saying, sorry, I misread and all that in home conditions. I just didn't see that coming. But you never write this Indian test team off, especially at home.
Yeah. We are recording this, like we said, on Friday night, and the last ball of the day saw Kohli getting dismissed, and we don't know how Saturday will come out. For all you know, it would be Sarfaraz hitting a double century, or India would be getting all out in another 20-30 runs. We don't know which way the wind will blow on Saturday. But I found it extremely funny the way the whole morning kind of panned out, because, that whole thing, right? The whole talk about aura and India being this unbeatable thing, and this Gautam Gambhir statements of high risk, high reward, etc. And then you just come out and are bowled out for 46. It's hilarious. But the great thing about that is, if, say, for example, we don't know again, like what happens by the time this podcast comes out, but if New Zealand do hold on to a win in the first test, it keeps the last test match of the series relevant, which hasn't been the case very often at home series. So that'll be interesting to watch. That I'm looking forward to how the next 2 days unfold, and unfortunately the suspense will be revealed by the time this episode comes out. But I guess unless Shashank has anything to add, or Vinayakk, you have anything to add, I think we can call it a day.
Is there a little bit of selfishness there, Mihir, so that Mumbai and Pune have good test matches?
I didn't want to say it myself, but now that you kind of mention it, then yes. The thing is, we know how the third, fourth day of Wankhede test will pan out. But again, the conditions on the opening morning at Wankhede will be very interesting. So if it goes down to that test, if that's a decider, and whoever gets to bat first might have to be very smart in the first session or two at Wankhede. So it'll be interesting.
By the way, Mihir, I have a question, but I think it's a very, very stupid question.
It's always been like that, Shashank.
Yeah, that's true. But I think this one might be remarkably stupid. Okay, so I'm going to cut it if it eventually ends up sounding stupid. Okay, but my thing is that, what is the reason we or you guys as sports journalists critique sports teams? Is it because tax money is involved? Is it because they're giving India a bad name?
No, emotions.
Is it?
No, emotions.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah, there's nothing else, at least for me. I mean, Vinayakk, I don't know, but for me, when I'm watching something, I'm emotionally invested in that. And if it goes one way or the other, and it's not just the Indian teams, right? There is a reason sitting way somewhere in Mumbai, people will be bothered about what's happening in Manchester because you're emotionally involved in it. And if it kind of screws your mind, screws your brain there, then there's going to be certain kind of reaction. So I guess that's about it. Vinayakk?
Yeah, I totally agree. There is no grandiose feeling of, we critique something and then things are going to change in the next 2 weeks, right? Absolutely no way.
Shashank, imagine कि जब भी India, Canada were expelling each other's diplomats, a team in one corner of our office was concerned about whether Harmanpreet Kaur and Shefali Verma should be continuing,
I think, who was that? Jurgen Klopp, right? That famous quote saying, sport is the most important of the least important things.
You guys seem to be having the most fun. Guys, Supreme Court का judgment आ जाए, budget आ जाए, कुछ आ जाए, नहीं, कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ रहा है.
कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ रहा है.
कभी-कभी हमें भी सुप्रीम कोर्ट का जजमेंट देखना पड़ता है, वो अलग बात है, but
But boss, Shashank, don't forget that when the foreign minister went to Pakistan, of all things, they met twice. एक बार dinner पे, एक बार lunch पे, and they spoke about the resumption of cricketing ties. And ये मैं बात कर रहा हूँ तभी मेरे पीछे घर के नीचे पटाखे बज रहे रात को 12 बजे. So imagine the level of excitement there.
You are being played off.
Yeah, I am being played off. Totally, yeah. But देखते हैं क्या होता है in the test match in Bangalore, and by the time we'll be doing the next, I think Pune भी start हो रहा है, so we'll have something new, something different to talk about next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Vinayakk and me, Mihir, and Shashank saying goodbye.
You were listening to Express Sports by the Indian Express. This week's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.